In some religious traditions, becoming a member means agreeing with a creed or a doctrine. In the Religious Society of Friends, we have no creed, but we do have fundamental principles by which we try to live. These principles are based upon our testimonies of simplicity, equality, community, integrity, peace, and stewardship of the earth. Those who become members of Cincinnati Meeting make a commitment to the life of the meeting and to service that nurtures that life. Members accept an appropriate share of responsibility for the spiritual life and practical affairs of the meeting, including care of the building and grounds and financial support of the meeting. Today, Cincinnati Meeting welcomes into membership 4 persons who have found themselves in unity with our testimonies and who are spiritually nurtured by our practice of worship, educational programs, and meeting for worship with attention to business. I'm going to ask that these 4 come and join me at the front here. Vicki Culler, Mary Whitrock, Bill Williams, and Deidre Hazelbaker. Put 2 here and 2 here. It is with joy and hope that we welcome these persons into our community at Cincinnati Meeting. As an expression of this welcome, the meeting offers you the gift of a wonderful little book called A Quaker Wisdom by a person by the name of Robert Warren Smith, and a copy of a book by a little known Quaker author, Jim Newby. There you go. There you go. There you are. There you are. There you are. I know that the friends tend to shy away from outward expressions and emotions, but I hope that you will feel led to enthusiastically and formally welcome these friends into our fellowship. Quakers class, clearness committees, and now here we celebrate their membership. So thank you. Glad you're here. After worship, there will be cupcakes in the entryway and fellowship outside. So I hope that you could be a part of that. Welcome to worship at Cincinnati Friends Meeting. I am Jim Newby, the minister and public friend of the meeting. Our worship this morning will consist of a brief message by me, followed by a time of meditative silence, or what Quakers call open worship. The silence will be broken by Ray Gears, a member of Ministering Council and my companion on the facing bench this morning. He will be asking about joys and concerns. For those of you in the meeting house, if you're led to speak out of the silence, please stand and a microphone will be brought to you. Please be sure and introduce yourself for our Zoom participants. And I ask that our Zoom participants also introduce themselves if they feel so led to speak. The scripture reading this morning is very brief. One of my favorites from 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you were doing. Over the years, the Quaker testimony on community has become a most important focus of our life together, and one of the most important messages that we can share with the world. In a time of divisiveness and tribalism, the testimony on community celebrates diversity and is all-inclusive. We are indeed members one of another, and and spiritually connected with everyone. On this new member first day, I would like for us to think once again about what it means to be in community with one another. In a setting such as Cincinnati meeting, the formation of community is one of those things that rarely just happens. It is something that we all must be conscious of nurturing. When I teach classes on Quakerism, I share a warning to all of those who are considering membership in this meeting. In brief, I explain that meetings are not perfect institutions, and neither are the members who fill the benches on first day, who staff its committees, or who work to bring to life the testimonies that we love and hold in common. What does this mean? It means that if you are a part of this meeting, one of two things will eventually happen. And Jeff reminded us of this morning in centering down. One, you will disappoint the meeting. Or two, the meeting will disappoint you. The time may come when the meeting doesn't do something that you believe is vitally important. We may fail to act on an issue or even act in a manner contrary to what you expect. At the same time, it is possible that you might not do something that the meeting asks of you, or do it in a way that does not meet the expectations of other members. Friends, these disappointments are inevitable within a community of faith. Though such inevitable disappointments are sad, it's part of being imperfect people, banding together in an imperfect way to create an imperfect institution. Now, there are many aspects to the formation and nurturing of community. For our purposes this morning, I'd like to focus on the following. First, community is formed when we gather together in worship to feel the power of spirit beyond our finitude. When we experience the living God with one another. Experience is a very important Quaker word. It was the direct experience with the living Christ that set George Fox on his mission to the world, sharing his experience that Christ, who in the 17th century church proclaimed was sitting with God in a faraway heaven, is actually a living reality in the hearts of people now. Early friends discovered what we continue to discover today, that when we worship in silence together under the guidance of the inner light or inner Christ, we grow together spiritually, and we connect with one another in loving community. Second, community is formed when we tell and retell our stories, when we share our memories, when we share life's spiritually meaningful experiences. One of the most important ways that we nurture community at Cincinnati meeting is in fellowship with one another. During the centering down worship sharing group, and in the spiritual nurture group and classes that happen during the week. It is in these times that we can share with one another who we are and what is important to us. To listen to the life stories of one another is a rare privilege in a world of surface living and disconnected moments. And by so doing, we form community. Third, community is formed when we help one another process each other's pain. when we cry with one another, and when we feel another's suffering. In his book, Out of Solitude, Henry Nouwen writes about how a true friend and community can be present for those in pain. He writes, when we honestly ask ourselves which persons in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving advice or solutions or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares. In 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes, if one member suffers, all suffer together. And as Albert Schweitzer has written, such experiences of pain can lead to a new place of interconnectedness. The person who has been delivered from pain must not think that he or she is now free again, at liberty to take up life just as it was before, entirely forgetful of the past. They are now persons whose eyes are open regarding pain and anguish, and they must help to bring to others deliverance which they themselves have enjoyed. They now belong to the fellowship of those who bear the mark of pain. Fourth, community is formed when we encourage one another and build one another up. Those wonderful words from Paul's letter to the church at Thessalonica. We live in a hypercritical world. In our meeting community, we should be able to live with one another without a critical spirit, putting each other down, being divisive, participating in gossip about one another, and using cruel words to describe others does not build community. The golden text of community comes from 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up. Fifth, and finally for this morning, community is formed when we live in a spirit of acceptance and forgiveness of one another. And when we become sensitive to not wound the hearts of others. This doesn't mean that there will not be times when we get on one another's nerves, or when this person or that person does something really stupid that we will not have something to say about it. It does mean that in our disagreements, we must be very careful never to wound hearts. I found that in a disagreement with someone in community, I can say, if what I have shared or said has wounded your heart, then I'm deeply sorry. That was not my intention. You don't have to back down and accept what is not acceptable to you. But it is important to distinguish between disagreeing with an issue and wounding a heart because you disagree. I love the words of Robert Owen. If we cannot reconcile all opinions, let us endeavor to unite all hearts. Being in community is difficult work because relationships are difficult work. When we come together in worship to feel the power of spirit beyond our finitude, when we tell and retell the stories about the meaningful experiences in our lives, when we help one another process each other's pain, when we encourage one another and build one another up, and when we live in a spirit of acceptance and forgiveness, we can at least begin the task of creating centers of loving fellowship, which in turn can consequently change our world.